As we keep up with all the headlines flying out of Washington, week 4 of Donald Trump's presidency, and it has been a roller coaster the last couple of days in particular. Today, Trump met with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and again seemed to upend decades of U.S. foreign policy by saying that he, Trump, could live with a one-state solution between Israel and the Palestinians as opposed to a two-state solution. In fact, he said whichever worked for both sides. There's also the embarrassing resignation of a key advisor, Michael Flynn, over contact he had with Russia's ambassador, and investigations are swirling about that. Plus, new reports from U.S. intelligence that other Trump aides had repeated contacts with Russia during the presidential campaign. Steve Farnsworth is standing by in Washington. He's got more on this. Steve, in the first month here, we've seen scandal, personal drama, legal challenges, and continued questions over the president's temperament. Is this White House in a state of turmoil?
Well, absolutely. You have seen more scandal and crisis in 1 month of Donald Trump than you saw in 8 years of Barack Obama. It is astonishing how many problems they have developed and how many fights they have picked from from the appeals courts to the trial courts to the immigration ban to the question of Russian involvement. It has been one thing of trouble after another for this new president.
I want to ask you about the meeting that happened today between Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu, in particular, talking about the idea of being able to live with a one-state solution. What did you make of that?
Well, I think this is another example of Donald Trump not doing all that much homework. I think Donald Trump relies in business on his instincts, but when you're a president, there's a lot of history of policy making that has taken place before you become the president. And when Donald Trump abandons the idea of a two-state solution, make no mistake about it, that's certainly what this adds up to, you're looking at a situation where decades of careful negotiations with Israeli and Palestinian counterparts, with the U.S. at the helm, have tried to broker some sort of deal. A one-state solution is totally unacceptable to the Palestinians, and it won't get anywhere. And either Donald Trump doesn't care that that's the fact, and that's probably more likely, but either way, you're not going to see real progress here. And so expect more trouble in the Middle East, thanks to Donald Trump abandoning what has been a central point of Democratic and Republican presidents who have tried to make things work in the Middle East.
Do you think he realizes, Steve, that that's what he has done here, or is he just sort of speaking off the cuff, sort of in a very casual manner, as he often does?
Well, certainly he is a casual person. He isn't particularly thoughtful about foreign policy, especially. And this is one of the reasons why I think one of the cases that one could make that the Donald Trump presidency may turn out better once it gets its footing is that there is a very competent defense secretary, a very competent secretary of state as part of his team. And so perhaps they will be able to direct him in a more professional, a more likely to succeed direction than what we've seen so far. It's a matter of really the people who work on the campaign not knowing the policy, having too much of the opportunity to shape what Donald Trump is saying in public. It's not a good strategy in the least.
I also want to read you on the front page of the New York Times today, Stephen. I've got my copy here. Trump aides had contact with Russian intelligence. U.S. officials describe a flurry of calls intercepted before the election. Some of that revolves around Paul Manafort, who was Donald Trump's campaign chair back in July. And again, more investigations on that. Number one, the timing. How come we didn't know about this months ago? And how does that play out here? Again, the Russia factor.
Well, the reason we didn't know about this months ago is because it seems like the FBI was very, very aggressive in putting out information that was derogatory towards Hillary Clinton, but kept to itself information, as we see, quite clearly explosive information with respect to the Trump campaign. It's not the best moment for the FBI. So that's why we didn't know as much about it then. But what you see here is really a very preliminary conversation about what might have happened, what might have been said. Again, we don't know the content of these conversations yet. And this is why I think that there will be growing pressure in the coming days and hours for an independent investigation run out of Congress, but run by both parties to get to the bottom of this. Because make no mistake about it, there are central national security questions here. Russia is a key rival to the West, increasingly a dangerous one when you think about the occupation of Crimea, the buzzing of various violations of international borders and boundaries in the air and in the water. You're looking at a very, very problematic idea that an American president is too cozy with what may very well be one of our leading international rivals.
It seems like so long ago, but of course, it was only 2 days ago that Mike Flynn, the head of, the national security advisor for the president, stepped down. And I'm curious your take on just the larger picture here. Again, this is a scandal for the president. General Flynn, was controversial going in, and now he is leaving because he did not mention these phone calls, I guess the content of some of these phone calls between himself and the Russian ambassador.
Yeah, this is exactly how not to run a scandal. It is astonishing to me that the Donald Trump presidency makes such obvious mistakes. If you're going to fire somebody, agree on what the story is when you do it. Do not change the story the next day. The press secretary, Sean Spicer, yesterday said that Flynn had to go because he had lost the trust of the White House, and that makes perfect sense. It's clear that Flynn lied to the vice president about whether or not there were calls involving sanctions before Donald Trump became president. And so if you can't trust your national security advisor on national security matters, you can't trust them on anything. So that's a perfectly reasonable story. And yet today, Donald Trump steps on that story, describing him as a good man who was basically railroaded out of town by an aggressive media. Well, if Donald Trump asked for his resignation because of a lack of trust, that's a better story to stick with than changing your story on day two. It is astonishing how short attention span Donald Trump believes politics is in this country. Democrats don't forget, and investigators don't stop investigating, especially when you change the story. That renews the question of what you are actually hiding. It is exactly how not to run a scandal in politics.
One final thing, and this has to do again with the bigger picture over all of the turmoil. This is a quote from Steve Schmidt, a Republican strategist, a man who worked in the Bush White House, worked for John McCain. He gave this quote to the Washington Post, quote, "None of this is normal. The incompetence, the sloppiness, the leaking is unprecedented." This is a Republican saying this, Steve.
Yeah, and it's absolutely true. You see, when you have a president who has at least worked as a governor or a senator for a while, a certain sense of what you can do and what you can't do. What's, I think, central of all in terms of what Donald Trump needs to learn is that our political system has a lot of moving parts, and you cannot, on your own as a president, get all that far. If the courts aren't willing to view this as constitutional, if Congress isn't willing to view it as acceptable, you're basically just going to be signing statements and meeting foreign leaders and not really making any kind of policy change. The level of leaking is astonishing, in part because I think a lot of professionals, again, these are not Obama people leaking, these are professionals, career staffers who work for Democrats and Republicans. They see something extraordinary here, they see something threatening here, and they're speaking out. At some risk, mind you, because they may be found out. And that speaks to just how profound the lack of trust that Donald Trump enjoys in Washington right now.
Great to have you on, Steve. As always, thank you for this.
Thank you.